really no secret whatsoever that these last few months have been rather tumultuous, to say the least, for Tim Lambesis. I am not going to do a full-blown recap. If you're watching this, and you most likely already know everything that's been going on, I've talked about it so much on the show, there's really no need to do it again. I will put a link down below in the description to all of the other videos that I've done on this. If you want a refresher, you need to get caught up to speed, whatever the case may be. But to very, very quickly touch on what has been going on. A few months ago, all of Tim's bandmates in As I Lay Dying quit on him, including the band's tour manager and his drummer in Austrian Death Machine, Brandon Short. There were rumors going around at the time that he was abusing his now ex-wife, Dany, but they were married at the time. She put out a statement saying that that was not true. And then around Thanksgiving, I think it was the night before Thanksgiving actually, those two videos surfaced of the two fighting, appearing very, very angry. It was just a crazy whirlwind of drama for a solid month or so. Tim then apparently served her with divorce papers. There was a domestic abuse investigation going on, and apparently he had a restraining order against her. And then as far as all of the band drama goes, he did put out a couple of statements sort of touching on everything, but you know, there was nothing really in any of those statements that had any real substance, at least in my opinion. But now Tim has done an interview. I believe this is his first interview since everything went down. There's another interview that was posted on YouTube after all of that stuff had happened, but I believe it was recorded beforehand. So I believe this new one is Tim's first. It was an interview with a guy named Justin Wenzel. I believe he's a fitness coach. It's a lengthy interview. It's just a little bit over an hour with a part 2 coming out at some point. Tim left a comment on the video thanking the host for having him and acknowledging that there will be a part 2. You know, and in this interview, he doesn't really say anything overly shocking or revealing, you know, nothing like that. I'll put a link to the interview down below, but there were a few points throughout that I thought were interesting and worth bringing up, and a lot of this was transcribed by the PRP, so thank you to them for transcribing all of this. And we will start with Tim acknowledging that the issues with his marriage to Dany eventually spilled over into the band, where he said, "I think it really just comes down to the amount of anxiety I had on a relationship level that I just carried on a regular basis of like not understanding. I just don't understand how you could be with a person and not be kind to them and like really mess with my head to the point where I would just wake up with anxiety. I'd go to sleep with anxiety. And to me, being that version of myself, it was inevitable I was going to push everybody else away, right? Because how do you connect with a person that's drowning in anxiety constantly but won't talk to you about it? I wasn't going to talk about it because I didn't want to let anybody know how deeply unhealthy things were, because then they would tell me I have to leave the relationship. But I wanted to find a way to fight and stay, right? So I just kept it in. And they're like, you know, people are just saying like, Tim's acting less and less like himself. Like, I'm concerned. What's going on? I never yelled at anybody or argued with anybody, or we never had fights. It wasn't like that. It was just like from afar, they were like, this dude just feels like he's falling apart. Like, what's going on? And the irony is that the relationship ended. My relationship ended at the same time that those guys sort of gave up, per se. I'm not blaming them, but the solution occurred at the same time that they felt like they no longer were, they didn't want to stick around because they felt like there was no solution. The host, Justin Wenzel, then asked Tim if there was any attempt from his now former bandmates to intervene, to which Tim replied, "That's not to their discredit. I mean, I tend to, the more I'm struggling, the more I isolate, right? I do have to defend them. So part of why I bottled up and isolated more is that I did get this sense of ultimatum that was like, hey dude, whatever you're going through, like, I can't see that stuff surface again, because if that comes out again, I'm gone." One of the guys had said that. And so there was like, okay, well now I feel like I gotta hide my struggle. Following that, Tim was asked if his bandmates at the time experienced anything questionable pertaining to Tim's behavior while on the road touring, with Tim responding, "Yeah, I mean, verbal arguments and stuff. Or, you know, you'd be like, hey, where did they go? Where did Tim, me and my ex would go, just be gone for the last 2 hours. Like, we're waiting for him." And it just was that whole, I'm just scratching my head and being like, how can I resolve conflict? And there was no way to possibly resolve it. I'm always looking for a way to resolve conflict. It's within my nature. Maybe it's the codependent thing like you're talking about. So I just like, all I care about is resolving it. There's really so much to this entire interview. I mean, we could be here for 20 minutes going over all of the interesting stuff from it. Not going to keep you that long, but there is a whole section where he gets emotional, speaking about losing the ability to see his adopted children after the whole Hitman thing back in 2013, trying to heal internally from that whole situation. He mentions that out of respect for the kids, he's been asked not to speak publicly about them. He also notes that he's not looking for pity from anything that has happened. But I think the last thing that I really want to discuss here for now is Tim bringing up the new album, Through Storms Ahead, which of course did in fact release when it was supposed to back in November, despite everything that was going on at the time. And then Tim was discussing the lyrics on the record, noting that they are basically a subconscious cry for help. And then the future of As I Lay Dying gets brought up, where Tim says, I don't really want to talk about the details of that. I do feel like my task right now is to be further down this healing path, and when I'm there, I think it's somewhat inevitable that I will. For people that like As I Lay Dying already, I may not win over new fans or whatever, but for people that are like, I wonder if the next As I Lay Dying album is going to be good, or if whatever he does next is going to be good. Of course it's going to be good if I just focus on my health and become the person that can create that and have a stable surrounding and good community around me, and that's what's going to give it strength. But I mean, the musical creation has never been the difficult part for me, and that's like a weird thing, right? Like, you recall record label people or booking agents, and they're like, oh, well, is Tim good at his job? And they're like, of course he's good at his job, but he's potentially a mess in other areas of his life. So it's like, dude, my job is the least of my worries. Again, there's so much to this whole thing. I will put a link to it down below, and I'll also link to that PRP article that has a lot of the transcription, as well as all of the links to the other videos on this whole saga. As far as the future of As I Lay Dying goes, though, the band is still confirmed to be playing at Welcome to Rockville in May. Have to imagine that if that in fact does pan out, there will be more touring coming later in the year. I'd have to imagine already being January with nothing beyond that announced, probably looking at the fall, I would guess. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. We'll also have to wait and see who he can get that is willing to play with him As I Lay Dying. So I don't know. We'll stay tuned for that. But that's all I got for you for right now. Thanks so much for hanging out. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe below if you feel like it, and I'll see you next time.